maybe one-word answers. But again, you can feel free to answer as much as you'd like. And even throughout the webinar here, please feel free to use the chat, and if you have questions, let me know. Joelle, if I think you're monitoring that chat, if you could just let me know. It's a little difficult as I'm sharing my screen here to kind of look at everything. Yeah, so we're just gonna get started here. So I'm gonna start with a couple of discussion questions for you. Who has taken an online course before? And I'm sure this is now almost everybody. And then what is your impression of the course? That's all. You can say good, you can say bad, you can say terrible, you can say fantastic, anything you want. I'm just kind of curious on just your experiences and how you feel.
Well, it depends on, because originally for some people, online classes were like sending you work, emails, and things like that, zero interaction. But later down the road, you realize that these kind of things that we're doing through Zoom, Google Meet, Jitsi Meet, whatever platform, virtual platform, is necessary in order to clarify doubts. But that's the reason why I say it depends on, because it depends of the professor expertise and also of the policies of the institution, because unfortunately there are universities or language institutions that they don't care about it as long as they have enough people to enroll in their courses.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's very true. Right. It does depend on the context and where you're from and the institution as well, and whether or not you're offering successful online classes. And again, feel free in the chat to add in anything else of your experiences there. So continuing on. So that was more like, the first question was about, if you participate as a student. So now I'm kind of curious, who has taught an online class before, and what might have been challenging for you? And again, I will talk a little bit about my experience as well, and some of our instructors and some of the experiences they have gone through. So, I think, especially if you're coming from a classroom setting, teaching online does not come naturally necessarily, even though we, spend a lot more time on screens than we ever have in the past. It doesn't necessarily correlate to being a good online teacher. So my experiences as a student as well as a teacher in the beginning, I found it very challenging and difficult. And it took a little time to learn, how to be better at it and how to get more out of that as well. And again, I will go through the challenges throughout this webinar. So you'll hear a lot from my experiences of this. So if there's anything you want to share, let me know. I will just continue. Okay.
Feel free to share in the chat box if you have anything to share, okay?
Yeah, the chat box is perfect. Thank you. So to kind of get started, I know this makes a lot of sense. You're probably saying, well, why is he talking about, planning? I get that. But from my experiences, and especially at my university, a lot of departments weren't necessarily planning. And again, it was hard with COVID because we all had to jump online right away. But even you'll find maybe some programs who are thinking, let's offer some online classes. Maybe there's a little bit of planning beforehand, but there's a lot of times they just jump right into it. And that can be very problematical. And I've seen that sort of across different programs here in the US. So I just want to mention that it is very important here sorry, I'm trying to move the box here. Very important that you actually plan. Now, there are lots of different methods for planning. And this particular method isn't necessarily, for online learning. This could be really for anything. It could be for your institution. It could be for your business. It could be for your life. But I find this particular method of planning very successful that we've used in our context. So following this sort of linear approach here, we have empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. That empathy piece really is so important, and especially you'll see this a lot in education nowadays, that for the longest time, I think it was not really considered or really considered, you know, what do the students need? What do they want? How do they feel? You know, a lot of times it's more sort of the I, right? It's like, what does our institution need? And what do we need to achieve? But by doing that, I think you're putting the student at a disadvantage. So first and foremost, when you're planning an online course, I think it's really important to think of putting yourself in the shoes of your students. Where, like, what kind of struggles are they going to have going online? You know, whether it's technical, or have they had any experiences before being online? You know, that's apart from, you know, WhatsApp or watching videos on YouTube, for example. I have this, it says they're biased toward education, and I thought of kind of giving a definition of that because I think it's really important. And it says, don't be fearful to make choices and take action, even especially when you face indecision. I think I love that because there's a lot of times where we feel like, oh, I want to do this, but something's holding you back. So that's what that bias toward action is. And, you know, if you want to go online and you want to do it right, I think, you know, talking through it and really going for it is really the kind of attitude that you need to have. You know, again, the next step, defining the kind of type of program you're going to have. This is really a sort of market research piece, and then sort of, you know, brainstorming those ideas, which comes next, creating that prototype, and then testing it before you actually have students go in there. Again, maybe you're testing it with one class or a group of students instead of just throwing out your whole program right away. Again, you know, with COVID, I realized things have changed and we all have to go online regardless. But if you're looking past COVID and you're looking at continuing your online presence, I would kind of go back and plan a little bit and really think about how the classes went and how they've done. So before even COVID started, I had created a class and an online course. And I'll talk a little bit more about that course. But in the planning stages, the reason why I decided to do this, like why did I want to do this, kind of ended up being that sort of empathy piece. I started talking with students across the world. We had offered a scholarship at our institution, and in order to apply for this scholarship, students had to write an essay. And I went through and read a lot of different essays. So I really got to know a lot of the world and you know, and a lot of what drives these students, motivates these students. So I wanted to share a couple of these stories because this really is that empathy piece I talked about, and this really helped me in developing my course. So here's one particular student from Managua, and one of the obstacles this student talks about says, because I want to achieve this dream, I am looking for opportunity to study abroad. But the situation that is happening in my country affects me, emotional, academic, and economic aspect. A very hard situation is happening in my country because we have around 7 months that the government is killing students because to have critical thinking or have our own flag is a crime. We cannot express our feelings or thoughts. Now, I don't want to get into the politics necessarily, but again, it's really kind of looking into what is the student needing? What is the student, you know, what is motivating the student? And why are they writing this particular story? Another one, and this is a woman from Rwanda. And she says, in our culture, living as a big family is what makes us come together and be strong as one. It's a beautiful quote. The obstacles that she has. Growing up in a poor family was so difficult that I never had access to many things in life, such as the opportunity to study online. And even when I was attending school, I was always sent out of school due to non-payment of my school fee. So getting the opportunity to study online has made a lot of impact in my life. Getting the money to pay for my school fee and accommodation when studying abroad is my biggest challenge. So again, two people from completely different places on the planet, all having struggles to study abroad and to come to the US. So again, based on these stories, what obstacles do they have in common? So I think first and foremost, they're very difficult commonalities there that they're having to deal with, the types of obstacles that they're having to go through. And besides obstacles, what else might they have in common? So the obstacles that they talked about, you know, were economic, political to some extent, but really it came down to, I think, the money. Now that's the sort of obstacle. However, when not thinking of the obstacles, what else do they have in common? And the one thing that really sticks out is that sort of drive, this want to become better, this want to have more education. And then what is the solution to those obstacles? Well, so economical, travels, politics, all these things make it really difficult to come to the US and study abroad. I admit it can be very expensive if you're not sponsored. It's economically not feasible for many people. So as I'm reading these stories, this is that empathy piece where I started thinking, what do these students need, and how can I help them? So that's how I started planning, and that's how I created my first online course. And I will talk a little bit more about that in a second. So the types of online courses to consider. So there are basically two types, and I kind of added the MOOC in there because that's the way I created mine. So we have synchronous and asynchronous and synchronous online learning. I'm sure a lot of you have heard this in these last couple of months. So, but if you haven't, so asynchronous online learning is basically, real time or not real time learning. So, the term may still be a 10-week term, for example, but you're not sort of tuning into a classroom at a certain time of the day to be with your teacher. The teacher a lot of times may have, videos or lectures that are pre-recorded. There might be times where you do, have a class with your teacher, but it's really more, there are certain activities and tasks throughout the week, and you're just working through them. There's not a particular class time that you're tuning into. Where synchronous learning is the opposite of that, right? And this is a lot of what I think we're doing now in this sort of age of COVID-19. We've moved sort of the synchronous in-class model to the synchronous on-class model. So there is a time that you're tuning in, you're meeting with your teacher, and you're watching and you're having lectures. Both have advantages and disadvantages, which I'll talk about later. So the MOOC, again, is an asynchronous online learning tool, but it's a little different because it actually a lot of students get involved with this particular class. And a lot of times they're very inexpensive and almost cheap or free. So the class that I created, in light of some of the things I heard from these students about, the economics of studying abroad, I decided to go with this particular format because I could create a free online class for that community of learners. And I can have a lot of them. Currently, the class is still running, and you can, feel free if you visit our website, for example, which is basically if you just Google search ELCDU, you'll find our webpage, and then you can just kind of search through there and you'll find this class, and you can go through it on your own. You don't even have to do all the activities. And that's the great thing about a MOOC class is, there's no grades. It's just students kind of going through on their own. So with a MOOC, we had up to about 3,000, maybe close to 4,000 now. I haven't checked recently, students who have been going through this class. It just requires a little bit from the instructor just to kind of go in and maybe talk in the chat box, for example, or the discussions and things like that. But really, it's for students to go through on their own. So I talked a little about what the MOOC is. And I'm going to show you a little bit on how I structured it. We basically had to think, okay, so we're going to have English language learners on this course from all over the world at different levels. So you can only imagine at different proficiency levels. You can only imagine how difficult that would be. So basically did create a class that a student can work through from sort of a low intermediate to high advanced level. Even sort of a foundational level, sort of an A2 level student would be okay. It'd take them a little longer, and they could do some translation through it if they wanted as well. But we made it so that was the case, so that many different types of level proficiencies could take the course. And then the most important piece of the asynchronous class really is organization. And I'll talk about that again later too, but everything pretty much follows the same sort of structure within the class. So students don't really get lost as they go through. They can always see that they're always kind of familiar with each module, each piece as they go through the course. So I'm gonna play for you here a sort of introductory video that we had created for this class. And I will put down that web page in a second. Nope. All right.
Hello, Welcome to the course, Your Adventure Story from Home to a U.S. University. My name is Tim Robinson. I'm the Associate Director of the English Language Center at the University of Denver and one of your instructors for this course. I'm so excited to join you on this study abroad journey. Let's start with an overview of the course. This online course is a self-paced one-month class. The course comprises of 4 modules, 1 module a week. All the modules are organized sequentially, which means you will need to complete Module 1 before you start Module 2. Upon completion of each course, you will be awarded a badge. Module 1, the Explorer Badge, Module 2, the Voyager Badge, Module 3, the Adventurer Badge, and Module 4, the Daredevil Badge. Also, once you have completed the full course, you will be awarded a certificate of completion. But of course, the true reward will come from all the new knowledge you will gain from the course. Now let's talk about the course. There are 2 parts to this course: the thematic part, study abroad strategies, and the practical part, English academic writing and storytelling. Within each module, you will find instructional videos, readings, discussions, assignments, and quizzes. Module 1, First Steps, will focus on first steps in the study abroad journey. This includes best practices on how to get started, as well as research on the different programs and financial opportunities available. The writing will introduce you to academic writing structure and the power of how your personal stories can help your study abroad goals. Module 2, Preparation. This module will help you better understand the steps to take in the U.S. university application process, which also includes visa procedures. The writing part will continue with academic strategies to improve your writing, but also introduce you to how to use your personal stories for college admission. Module 3, Planning. This module, you will better understand what may be needed before you leave your home country, such as housing, U.S. college expectations, and standardized tests. For the writing part, you will continue with your personal stories and learn new strategies of incorporating your stories. Finally, Module 4, Destination, we will illustrate the cultural and academic challenges international students may have to confront. For the writing part, you will create a final draft of your stories that you will be able to use as a personal statement to help admissions. Understand why they should pick you to study in their programs. Now, studying abroad can appear to be a difficult journey, but with dedication and perseverance, you can make that dream a reality. The more time you spend on this course and are engaged in discussions, the more you will gain. This class will create a world community of learners sharing the desire to pursue an education that will help you grow and bring the world closer together. Welcome and enjoy the class.
Thank you. It's great. So that's one of the videos that started off the online course. We did have to create quite a bit up front, and that's the one thing about asynchronous learning. Here, let me go back to my slides here. Yeah, so talk a little about the resources. So for this class, with asynchronous learning, there's actually a lot of prep up front, and especially with these types of courses. So some of the resources that we utilized, luckily we do have the university here, and we're able to utilize a lot of what they have to offer. So there is a video creation studio, which is awesome. So, it goes in, there's a green screen, you can create videos, you can have animations put into them. But that said, the studio's there, but it takes a lot of work to learn how to not only film, but also the sort of post-editing of these videos. And I have almost zero to no knowledge, well, I had zero to no knowledge on how to do this, but I learned. I learned how to use, for example, Adobe Premiere. I learned how to use different types of sort of video creation video software to make the videos a little more interesting. It's challenging, it takes a lot of work, but unfortunately that's kind of what is needed when trying to make an online course, and especially interesting, because you'll find people tune out very, very quickly. And then I was able to utilize a lot of different people here on campus. So we interviewed the Office of International Admissions, the Financial Aid Office, our teachers, Health and Counseling Center, former international students as well to give advice. So a lot of different people were a part of this, because again, that's a very important piece to online learning. Is I know there's a central teacher, but the more you can get others involved, the more engaged you can get your students as well. So This was a very sort of ambitious project. It did take some time, and a lot of online classes don't necessarily need to go that route. So again, this was me planning, hearing the other students, hearing their sort of feeling my empathy towards what they needed, and then creating this class for them. And as far as I know, some students were actually able to take what they learned here and to utilize it. So not only did they learn English throughout this course, it was a theme-based course where they were able to use the knowledge to study abroad. And whether it's the US, Australia, or a different country, I think they built a little more confidence there. So let me get into a little bit here about the synchronous learning, the pros and cons for students. So the thing about asynchronous interaction, students can complete tasks on a structured yet flexible schedule that works for them. This is great for language learners, mainly because it takes a little longer to process, I think, for language learners. It gives them time to kind of think through what they're working on. So asynchronous learning really lends itself to that. Another pro is students have more time to consider their responses to prompts and cultural and linguistic nuances. Now, if your students are only from one particular culture and the teacher's from that same culture, that's great, and they may not have problems with those nuances. In our context, we have students from a lot of different countries. And again, I'm a product of growing up in the United States, so I do still use a lot of cultural linguistical terms or pop culture terms that they may not be familiar with. So in an asynchronous class, it takes, that gives them a little more time to kind of think through what the teacher is saying. Another pro, more developing is needed up front. But once the course is created, less time is needed to teach the course. So this could be in the con side, and I think I might have put there as well. It really kind of depends on how you look at it. So that upfront, like developing the class, because a lot of times the great thing about an asynchronous class is once it's developed, you can just pass it on to almost any teacher. As long as it's, it has all the materials and has everything they need, it's a lot easier to show a teacher how to teach with these types of classes. Because a teacher becomes really more of, a guide than anything else. And then a well-prepared course can be easily taught by multiple instructors. So we currently, so in that MOOC class, for example, there was about 4 of us that were actually teaching and helping out with that particular course. And which is great, a lot of times, having just one teacher, one class, that's fine, but actually there's evidence out there that says it benefits students to have more than one teacher. The cons, so students may need more time to read or listen to assigned material, or read and respond to prompts or discussion posts. Now, I said earlier that during asynchronous classes, they have time. However, the time might be, for example, like an activity is due that week and they can plan out their schedule. However, the other side of that is, you maybe have 10 weeks in your term, and each week you must complete something. And if it's not completed, it's really, you fall behind, and you may not be able to catch up in sort of asynchronous style. So week to week, students can't necessarily go back and say, hey teacher, I need help with this, or I need help with that. It's almost like now we're moving on to something new. Another con, students may submit shorter or less complex writing assignments. This is very true. If students don't feel like they're being watched, or there's not a teacher there, or presence of a teacher in front of them, they'll try to take shortcuts. You may not see this as much in university students or students who are very motivated, or adults necessarily, but you'll definitely see a lot of this with younger students. Because to them, it's all about just turning in that assignment, not necessarily about what they get from it. Another con, again, is the biggest one probably, is less live interaction. Students may have fewer opportunities to ask clarifying questions, and there is ways to get around this, and I'll talk about that as well. But yeah, you might have some screen time with your teacher, but there's some asynchronous classes you may never. I've been in classes as a student, asynchronous online classes, where there's discussions, which can be very interactive and just a great experience, and you can learn a lot. But there's been cases where the teacher hasn't really been there in those discussions, hasn't participated in them. Students may feel less motivated to learn with less interaction. Yeah, and I think I covered that a little bit. Again, it really depends their context, where they're coming from. You know, if students are forced to take these classes, they're going to have a different motivation than those students who are actually wanting to. And that's the same as whether they're online or in person. But being online, you know, it's a little harder. Unfortunately, you have to find more ways to motivate your students. For some of you who are teachers here, I'm sure you're just thinking, what can I do? And then I mentioned this, again, this is a con and a pro, but there's a lot of upfront preparation for asynchronous classes. But once it's built, you know, there's very little needs to be changed as you keep running it term after term. And it's a lot easier for teachers to just grab one of those classes and start teaching with it. So synchronous, let's look at the pros and cons of these types of classes. So synchronous classes offer more potential opportunities for cultural learning and exchange. This is really the big theme for synchronous classes, especially if you have students from all over the world. They're together at the same time, so they're able to talk about their context, what's going on in their lives. They're able to share during synchronous classes because they're tuning in at the same time, whereas in asynchronous classes, they're not. There are more opportunities for social interaction. Yep. Synchronous. So actually, let me go back to that second one there. In some of our synchronous classes currently, the teachers have told me that when class is finished, some of the students have asked if the teacher could not sign out of the Zoom class, for example, the Zoom meeting. They wanted to hang out afterwards for another half an hour. Again, this is definitely more in the era of COVID because, you know, they're kind of stuck at home. But that is still a pro in synchronous learning. And maybe even if we weren't, you know, stuck at home, that would still possibly go on. Synchronous courses create more opportunities for students to build connections and comfort with instructors. Yeah, I mean, you're seeing each other each day, even though it's virtual and it's through a computer or a phone. You're seeing into their people's eyes and you're hearing them, you're developing relationships that way. Where in asynchronous learning, it can happen, but it doesn't happen so often. Mainly because, you know, we are social animals and we like to hear people talk. We like to see their facial expressions. And in asynchronous learning, you don't have that. There are less work up front. So I know, so a lot of you, you know, who possibly had to go online right away, you know, you were able to do that with synchronous classes. You're basically taking your, you know, your in-person class and you're saying, okay, let's just throw this online. So now I'm gonna just have a camera on me as I'm lecturing or as I'm talking. Again, and I'm not saying there's no work, it's just a little less than asynchronous work. So for asynchronous classes, you might be recording videos, you might be, you know, doing that flipping the classroom where, you know, you're having them watch those lectures at a separate time and then coming back and discussing it or doing an activity around that. They're more familiar to seasoned instructors. So yeah, teachers who have been teaching for 20, 30, 40 years, doing a synchronous method is probably a little bit more familiar, you know, because again, if you're just lecturing in front of a class, there's not much difference there. Again, there is a big difference in, of course, the activities and, you know, the ways to get students to interact, but there's a little more familiarity for many teachers. The cons, and this is a big con for us, was time zone differences. We currently have a student from Japan who works during the day and takes our classes in the evening. In Japan, for example, I think the time difference for him, he's studying basically from like 11 o'clock at night till 3 in the morning. It's really bad, and he's really been struggling. So again, it's really hard to have this type of model. Now, some of our teachers have a sort of hybrid model, and that's definitely something I don't get too much into, but is a possibility. You can have a bit of both, asynchronous and synchronous within your classes. And they are working with that one Japanese student. Students operating outside native languages or outside their home educational context may need more time to think and prepare responses for real-time interactions. So again, you see this also in in-person classes when students say, you know, what's the answer number 2, what's answer number 3, and students get frozen or they get nervous. And you see this also in synchronous classes because for some students, they need to think and process information before speaking. Another con, students operating outside their native language can find it hard to follow live discussions over computer-mediated technology. You know, I think teaching languages online, you know, is even from my experience, and it's not just because I'm in this industry, it's just, we have to think about a lot more than, say, you know, a professor teaching some theme-based course at a university who possibly maybe just lectures anyway. You know, we have to consider that language actually is 75 to 80% of it is nonverbal anyway. So when, you know, and we are teaching communication. So how do you teach communication via, when you're not actually in front of the person? And when it's communication in a different language, it makes it all the more difficult. So again, I did mention this, you know, the nonverbal cues that students might use to signal questions or clarification. It's harder to pick that up during videos or during times spent with students. So how do we overcome some of these challenges? When developing tasks and activities, so sparking interest. So for the MOOC, for example, we used a story model. So we had students basically tell their own stories. I'm sure a lot of you have had this experience possibly in your classes or as a student. Whenever an instructor talks about their lives or what they've experienced, all of a sudden people are all ears. People like to hear stories. Basically, you know, as Homo sapiens, as, you know, as a world community, that's what we do. We tell narratives. That's how we, you know, that's how politics works. That's how communication works. Everything is around a story. Everything's around a narrative to some extent. So if you can tap into that, into getting students by telling their stories or hearing the stories of others, it really, really sparks interest. And I found it can be very, very powerful. Adopting mixed methods. This, I can't, you know, talk more, I mean, can't talk enough about this and how important it is. Really, not just, you know, doing the same thing over and over where, you know, you have students watch your grammar lesson and then they do the same type of activity. You know, this is, again, these are, you know, these are challenges again for in-person stuff too, but for online classes, it's just, I think, amplified a little bit more. So mixed methods, you know, so even in that MOOC class, we had different things that we would introduce. So yeah, even though we structured it the same, there were different activities that they would have. And that's, and then to get some of the feedback from some of our surveys afterwards, that's really what they enjoyed, the students. Discussion, again, this is huge. So use discussion, writing assignments to support prior knowledge. It's hard to get students to discuss online, you know, because I think they're so used to using discussion for relaxation and for fun, you know, whether it's with whatever social network they're using. So when you introduce that as an activity and possibly as a graded activity, they resist and they don't have as much fun in there. So I like to see kind of a combination too of discussions where students are free to kind of talk and make mistakes, but also, you know, throw in a graded discussion as well. One thing I've noticed too about online discussions, especially ones that are written and not necessarily spoken, you can have really, really excellent, well thought out answers. And the reason for that is because, and especially in asynchronous classes, is that, you know, you might have the material in front of you and you have the time to really think about your answer. So I have been in discussions before as a teacher and as a student that have been really thought-provoking, almost far better than what I've heard in class. Amping up collaboration. This is something that teachers are going to have to do constantly, but it's very important in the online arena that you just really got to keep pushing students to collaborate and collaborate. We use Canvas at as our sort of learning UMS platform at the university. I like Canvas, but I know a lot of people use Blackboard. There's a lot of other ones out there, Moodle, for example, but they all kind of have similar tools. And in Canvas, there is a collaboration tool. And even within Zoom, if you're using that as well, there's the collaboration tool for breakout rooms, et cetera. But, you know, and it's just having activities where students are still collaborating, they're still working on things. Now that's in real time, whether you're using Zoom or the collaboration tool in Canvas during class. There's other ways like projects. So basically before we even went online, a lot of our in-person classes have gone into sort of a project-based learning. system where students are doing projects throughout the term. And in those projects, they have to lean on other students. And really, it requires students to talk with each other. Again, it helps when students are from different language backgrounds instead of the same. But even if they are from the same, you know, they still are going to have to use English to some extent to work through that project. Again, support language processing, you know, whether it's asynchronous or synchronous, you know, if you are doing a synchronous class and you're teaching, you're going to have to give a little bit extra time. I think some of you even find that sometimes your classes go by so quickly online and you can't get through everything. That's okay. And as long as, and I think, you know, being able to get through material is not really the goal. Really the goal is getting students to be able to use the language. So they might need a little extra time to process what they're hearing or what they're doing. And then structure, whether it's asynchronous or synchronous, whatever UMS system you're using, whatever instructional design system you're using online, it needs to have structure. And even in our program, you know, I'm the administrator of our Canvas system, our online system, and I see teachers go in and they make a lot of changes. And some of the feedback I get from students is that there's just a mix and they get lost and they get confused. So if you have students who, you know, this is their first time learning online, if you're teaching adults, for example, that structure is going to be really key. And what I mean by structure is sort of sequence the same way. You don't want, like if you're using a sort of module approach, make all your modules look similar. You know, maybe for all your classes, you have a sort of introductory module where there's a place where students can go in and ask the teacher questions. Maybe have that same piece in all your classes. For example, the home page, maybe whenever students log on, they're logging on to the same looking home page with maybe just a slight difference from that says the name of the class, for example. So again, that it's very important. I've been in a few conferences and about online learning, not necessarily language learning, but online learning. And this is something that they talk about all the time, about the structure. If you're looking, so the homepage when students are first logging in, not all our students use this method, but I have heard that a schedule is the first thing that, you know, that they like to see. Like what is coming up? What are the assignments? What do they need to do? Sort of kind of like a calendar is the first thing that they should see. And then use a variety of online mediums. So I talked about, you know, mixed methods of instruction, but this is sort of like the resources, right? So using different things like video, online discussion, in-person interaction, flipping classrooms with lectures online. There's a lot of different things you can do. Scavenger hunts through the internet. I mean, so just kind of using as much as you can that's available to you, not just the same type of book or activity. And then I kind of talked about this already, but a free space that doesn't require a grade is really important in online learning. I think just in learning in general, you know, we're so obsessed with, well, I said institutions are obsessed, not necessarily teachers, with assessment. And I know assessment is important and there is a very important place for that in learning. But I think having a space where students are able to express themselves, where they're not being graded, you could probably see some really amazing things happening within that particular space. So it's important to consider the difference between online and face-to-face teaching. They're not the same. Again, this is why I think the planning stage is so important. And actually being a student as well as a teacher, I think having both those experiences are very important. If you think that teaching a class in the classroom is the same, you're gonna probably stumble and make some mistakes. Then again, you know, if you make the mistakes and you correct them, great. But I have seen a lot of our instructors who are seasoned instructors, been with us for a long time, they've been teaching for 30 years, and they stumble, they struggle online because it is different. And then make the most of free online resources. The one greatest thing that I have seen in our industry is the amount of resources available online. I think for the longest time, we were fed by publishers that we need to have their books, and we need to have their resources. So our department now has almost gone completely publisher free. We still have one text that we use for a foundational level, But every other level we offer, we use primarily online resources or in-house materials that we've created ourselves. It saves the students money, it saves us money, and there's just so much out there. And it does take a long time to find those resources, and I'd be happy if you email me, happy to share what I have and what I know, and where to go. And then the course should focus on community building. That's really important. You know, I know we do this in person in classes. You know, in the first day you do icebreakers, you do, you know, get to know your students. But online learning should be the same. Even if you know the students, you know, talk to them, find out what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what their struggles are, how do they feel about online learning. Just have that constant communication with them, and then hopefully they do that with each other as well. And then clear instructions and develop a plan for students to reach out for help. So whenever students, this is very important in asynchronous learning, if students are struggling with something, they need a place within the online environment where they can share their frustration or their need for help. So maybe it's a discussion post where they can go in and just communicate with the teacher or with other students, but there needs to be that place, and it needs to be clear where they can go. And again, for students at very low levels, again, if they're all speaking the same language and the teacher knows that language, you know, some of these instructions can be in that language. I think it's perfectly fine. Using the L1 is important sometimes. Now, in our context, you know, we have multiple languages, so we can't do that, but we still try to make it very clear that students can reach out to their teachers or to the administrators, for example, if they need anything. And then research your online platform. So again, I talked a little bit about the different types that are out there. They all are a little bit different. And I think some of them, you know, have advantages, some of them don't. But if you don't have a choice, you don't have a choice. I get it. And then, you know, and maybe not even research your platform of what to use, but also research on how to use it. What I understand, you know, like 10% of what these Canvas, Blackboard, and Moodle offer is actually used. There are so many great pieces to it to incorporate into a class and that are never used. And then there's a lot of LTI tools. Those are the tools that you can kind of add into your platform. And I don't know much about Blackboard, but I believe you can add those as well. And then finally, and again, if, as an institution, you may not have the resources or the money for this, but, you know, it's always, I'd like to throw this in there, is that there is an instructional designer that, you know, that you can bring in or possibly consult with developing the classes. I think that could go a long way. These guys are amazing. I've worked with instructional designers and sometimes you're just, wow, I never thought of that. This is so fantastic. I mean, this is their job. But that said, I have developed classes online that I had no instructional designer. I learned as I went, but I always had a team with me, and I always, you know, reached out when I didn't have the answers to my questions. So, kind of wrapping up here. And again, you know, just a couple questions, and feel free to chime in to the chat here. And if you have anything else that you want to ask me, that's fine too. So what did you like in a course that you took online, and why? And what didn't you like with an online course?
Hello again. Well,
Hello.
personally, when you provide a reference, such as links, websites, universities, pages, things like that, because in that way you're able to contrast what you're learning. The thing that I don't like, especially, is when they don't provide any type of scaffolding or modeling information, because sometimes teachers assume that you are aware of certain parameters that we are not aware of. So that's what I don't like, basically.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. And I liked how you mentioned the scaffolding. Again, very important. Everything really needs to build on itself. I know we hear that word scaffolding in language learning all the time, but even with sort of teaching online or just teaching in general, like it's also sort of follows a scaffolding approach and sort of how you're developing your course as well. and again, you know, students really appreciate it too, if that's something you really consider. Okay. So I'm going to just end here with a final thought. And again, I'll, you know, open up for questions or clarification from anybody out there who wants, who has a question or anything like that. But I always like to end with quotes. We all like quotes, right? Because I mentioned that sort of, story piece, which is important. So we need to bring learning to people instead of people to learning. So the one great thing about online learning and is just that, you know, it's really opening it up to the world. People who have never had access to, let's say, you know, an instructor from the United States or an instructor from Panama, right? It's now opening that up, and we can now bring the learning to people. Granted, there's technology challenges throughout the world, and a lot of that, you know, is, you know, it may be political, it may be something else, it may be economical, but really people are coming closer together, and it's making education easier to sort of have access to for everybody. And then next, I have e-learning shouldn't be a casual joyride on a Sunday afternoon with the cruise control engaged. The sole purpose of e-learning is to teach. So again, I like this quote because a lot of us think that online is just, it's garbage, you know, it's just an easy ride. But I can tell you from experience, and especially from some of the teachers I've had in the past at the university who've taught classes online, it has been far much more work for me as a student, and I've gotten a lot more out of it. But granted, it does take a lot of energy from the instructor and from the student themselves to sort of find that spark and that motivation to turn that online learning experience into something productive for them. But you can learn a language online, you know, and I think there are plenty of platforms out there that, you know, like Duolingo, for example, has one, Babbel has one. These are, you know, these are learning programs, but they use AI. So the one thing that's still missing there is that teacher piece. And I still think students overall enjoy that. So we can compete with those types of programs and those language learning software, mainly because we still offer that, that sort of in-person teacher touch that a lot of the AI cannot. So thank you very much. And I'm available to all of you. There's my email. I'm free, you know, feel free to ask me anything you like, you know, whether it's about online learning. If you'd like to know more about our programs, I'll be happy to share that with you as well. We, in the foreseeable future, we're currently in our summer term and all our classes are online. For the fall term, which is coming up, we are doing something called a HyFlex model, which is kind of a new, I didn't talk much about that in this presentation because that's a whole new presentation that would take another hour. But it's basically a model that offers in-class and online at the same time. And that's something we're going to be doing in the fall because some of our students will be in class and some of our students will be online. And it'll be very interesting to see how that goes. So if you're interested in that, if you're interested in our programs in our university, if you're interested in anything from the University of Denver, please reach out to me anytime and I'll be happy to answer your questions. And I want to thanks to Let's and Joel, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for collaborating and sharing your experience and knowledge. I know you have, you know, you are an expert in this because it's something that you have been doing for years. I don't know if we have people here would like to have, if somebody else would like to have any question for Tim or anything, could be, you can open your mic or do it in the chat box. And I would like to thank you, Tim, again for, you know, for your time. I know you are like kind of, you know, taking time off, right? It's summer right now.
A little bit.
Yeah,
it is summer, yeah.
And I think that every time that we have the opportunity, and Tim was going to be in our event last March, right? Was one of the keynote speakers.
Yes, that's right. And I was looking forward to that.
Next year you're gonna come to Panama, all right? Hopefully. So,
Yes, yes.
do you have any question here or something to share here? And
Hi, this is Navina. I really enjoyed your course. I just came in a bit later on as I just saw the message right now. I really love the tidbits that you shared with us. I really enjoyed it. But could you please maybe, if it's possible, to give us some how to get in to work on our in-house resources and which links we could look into when we want to use some online resources too?
Yeah, yeah. So doing sort of researching online materials. So they call it OER, so open-ended resources. These are becoming very popular now, and there's different types that are out there, and it's almost a full-time job to really research all that. But just to kind of get you started, I would sort of, just to start off with a simple Google search of I would just type in OER English language resources. And you'll probably just right there, just get a lot of different things that you can kind of start looking into and kind of exploring. I'd be happy to share with you, if you just email me, I can share with you some sites that have
Sure.
sort of advice and suggestions for you of where to go. The one thing about OER too, about these types of resources, is that it's a good place for teachers to start publishing themselves. So I'm just a strong advocate of getting everyone out there in the world to share their activities, to share things that work for them, their ideas. If you can even write your own textbook, and you may not even have contacts with publishers, for example, but it doesn't matter. In some of these sites, you can actually do that, and you can share them. And there are even some sites that that will pay you for some of this stuff as well. And I'd be happy to share what I have for that.
Thank you.
And one particular site I can just help, I don't know, trying to remember, our teachers use a lot of, oh my goodness, I just forgot the name of it. It's actually a reading site where you're able to sort of change the language proficiency of each article. And there is a paid pro, they call it the pro version of it, but there's a free version of it as well. And again, if you email me, I'll get that information for you. But
Perfect. I'll send you an email. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, there are lots of sites like this, for sure.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
do you have any other question or comment here? No?
Any other questions?
It seems no.
How about one more question? I have one for you is, what was your first experience when you started with online teaching and creating your own course? How was that? It's because I'm thinking of opening my own, and any tidbits or any pitfalls you've had?
Oh yeah, I would say probably the first, just this feeling of being overwhelmed, I think, is that, but I mean, you could really say that's the same for any sort of curriculum development, but, especially when I took on the online course that I created, yeah, it was just, that first sort of couple weeks, couple days where I'm just trying to visualize what I'm doing, and just saying to myself, wow, I'm out of my element here. I have some knowledge of technology, but I didn't necessarily study instructional design or online instructional design at the university. My knowledge is very limited around video creation, things like that. So it's all my education in the past has been how to just teach language. So I think for me, the biggest learning curve was this, all of a sudden, okay, now I'm teaching language and I'm gonna have to do it online. So sort of reimagining what that looks like. And that was really the most difficult piece of it all. But, like I said, it's very important to just don't let those sort of negative thoughts, I mean, it's important to have them, of course, to address them, but don't let them sort of stop you. Because I ended up just learning so much, and I actually kind of reinvigorated my career, where I was teaching for about 20 years and I was getting stuck. And then when I started doing this, it felt good again. It felt like, wow, and it challenged me and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same plateau now. So after 24 years of teaching, it's something different I like to do. And this is something I have learned with QLU, and I'm still their student. And I really really appreciate this the seminar. It kind of is an eye-opener. Thank you very much. I really
Sure.
enjoyed it.
You're welcome. Thank you. Any other
Thank you
questions?
very much. Here I send you in the chat box an email if you want this video because it's been recorded, and you follow the our Instagram where we post our seminars and our trainings that we have during the week. So again, team, now we have 2 more minutes for you.
Thank you. Sorry, could you say that? Sorry, I missed the last part.
We have 2 more minutes just to
Oh.
close the event. I would like to give this 2 minutes for you.
Perfect. Yeah, so if there aren't any questions, anything last ideas? Okay. Yeah, so again, I appreciate everything. This was great. And, I would love, if you ever have anything on your end, if you ever have a webinar, if you ever want to talk shop, just let me know. I'm happy to, we could happen to coordinate through Zoom anytime. Joelle said it is summer here, so I'm trying to enjoy it, but yet, we're all shut down, well, somewhat shut down. That's not as much as you are in some of your countries, but, we're still kind of stuck at home. So I'm happy to share everything, all my knowledge, everything I know with all of you. So have a great day and good luck.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, and see you in our next event. All right.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you, team. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Joelle. I got to run.